The dust devils danced across the barren trail like ghosts of dead prospectors, spinning their tales of broken dreams and empty pockets. Amos Walker squinted against the afternoon sun, his weathered hands steady on the reins as his old mare, Buttercup, plodded along the familiar path back from Garrison's trading post. The saddlebags hung heavy with supplies: flour, salt pork, coffee beans, and a precious tin of peaches he'd splurged on after finding a few nuggets last month. At 34, Amos had spent half his life chasing gold in these unforgiving hills. The California rush had come and gone, leaving men like him scattered across the territories like seeds that refused to take root. His calloused fingers bore the scars of countless hours wielding pickaxe and pan, his back permanently bent from crouching over streams that promised fortune but delivered mostly disappointment. The wind shifted, carrying with it something that made Buttercup's ears twitch, the thin, desperate wail of an infant. Amos pulled up short, his hand instinctively moving to the Winchester tucked beside his saddle. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest settlement. That sound didn't belong. He urged Buttercup forward, following the sound over a low rise. What he saw there stopped his heart cold. A woman lay crumpled in the buffalo grass, her calico dress dark with what could only be blood. Beside her, 2 bundles of dirty cloth squirmed and cried. Babies, couldn't be more than a few months old. The woman's face was pale as bleached bone. Her auburn hair spread around her head like spilled wine. Amos dismounted before his mind could form a coherent thought. His boots crunched through the dry grass as he approached, speaking low and gentle, like he would to a spooked horse. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of winter sky. For a moment, she stared at him without recognition. Then her cracked lips moved. "Please." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Take them. Take my babies." Amos knelt beside her, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as he checked her injuries. The blood seemed to be coming from somewhere below her waist, soaking through layers of petticoat. Birth blood, he realized with a start. These babies were fresh to the world, and their mama was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere. "What's your name, ma'am?" Maybelle Carter." Her hand clutched weakly at his sleeve. "Promise me. Promise you'll take them somewhere safe. Find them a good family. They're girls. Mister, nobody wanted girls." The bitterness in that last statement cut through Amos like a knife. He'd heard such stories before. Families abandoning women who couldn't produce sons, leaving them to fend for themselves in a world that had little mercy for the weak. "Where's your husband? Your people?" A tear tracked down her dust-caked cheek. "Gone. Left us here to die when he saw they were girls. Said I was cursed. Said his family—" She coughed, and a trickle of blood appeared at the corner of her mouth. Amos had seen enough death to recognize its approach. The woman, Maybelle, was fading fast. The rational part of his mind told him to take the babies to town, leave them at the church door, and wash his hands of the whole mess. He had his own struggles, his own empty belly half the time when the gold didn't show. But something in those blue eyes held him. Maybe it was the way she looked at those crying bundles with such fierce love despite her pain. Maybe it was the memory of his own mother, dead these 20 years, who'd fought tooth and nail to keep him fed during the lean times. "I ain't taking them nowhere," he said gruffly, shrugging out of his coat. "I'm taking all 3 of you." Hope flickered in her eyes. "I'm dying, mister. Can't you see that?" "Maybe so, maybe not, but I ain't leaving you here for the coyotes." He wrapped his coat around her as best he could, then gathered the babies. Lord, they were tiny things, and placed them gently in the crook of one arm. With his free hand, he whistled for Buttercup. The mare ambled over, and Amos faced his first challenge. How in blazes was he supposed to get a half-dead woman and 2 newborns onto a horse? "Can you sit up if I help you?" Maybelle tried, bless her, but her strength gave out halfway. Amos set the babies down in the grass for a moment. They squalled louder at the abandonment, and half lifted, half dragged Maybelle to lean against a large rock. "Listen, ma'am, Maybelle, I'm going to put you on my horse. It's going to hurt like the devil, but my place ain't far. Maybe 4 miles. You hold on that long, and we'll see what we can do." She nodded weakly, and Amos set about the grim business of getting her mounted. By the time he'd managed it, her face had gone gray, and she swayed dangerously in the saddle. He quickly fashioned a sling from his spare shirt, tucked the babies inside, and tied it around his chest. They quieted some at the warmth and heartbeat, leading Buttercup by the reins. Amos began the longest 4-mile walk of his life. Every few minutes, he'd glance back to make sure Maybelle hadn't fallen. She clung to the saddle horn with a white-knuckled determination, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or cursing. He couldn't tell which. The sun was starting its descent toward the mountains when his cabin finally came into view. It wasn't much, a 2-room affair he'd built himself from pine logs and determination, with a stone chimney that drew poorly and a roof that leaked in the spring rains. But it was shelter, and right now that was all that mattered. "Almost there," he told Maybelle, though he wasn't sure she could hear him anymore. Her eyes had closed, and only the occasional whimper told him she still lived. Getting her inside proved another challenge. Amos ended up carrying her like a child while the babies bounced against his chest, their cries reaching a fever pitch. He laid her on his narrow bed, the only bed, and finally unwrapped the infants. 2 girls, as she'd said, identical as 2 peas, with wisps of reddish hair and faces screwed up in hungry protest. They couldn't be more than a day or 2 old, their umbilical cords still raw stumps tied with rough twine. "Lord Almighty," Amos muttered, running a hand through his graying hair. "What have I gotten myself into?" He built up the fire first. The October nights came cold in these hills, then set about boiling water. His medical knowledge extended to treating pickaxe wounds and snake bites, not whatever ailed Maybelle, but clean water and clean rags seemed like a good start. The baby's cries grew weaker, more pitiful, and Amos felt panic rising in his chest. They needed milk, and he had none. Buttercup was a mare, not a milk cow. The nearest neighbor, Martha Holloway, lived 3 miles east, and her goats might... A soft moan from the bed drew his attention. Maybelle's eyes were open again, focused on him with surprising clarity. "The babies," she whispered. "They're hungry." "I know, but I don't have a..." He gestured helplessly. I can feed them. Help me sit up." It spoke to her strength that she could still nurse her daughters despite her condition. Amos turned his back to give her privacy, busying himself with stoking the fire and trying not to think about the impropriety of the situation. An unmarried man with a strange woman in his house. The gossips would have a field day if they knew. When the babies finally quieted, Amos risked a glance back. Maybelle had managed to arrange her torn dress for modesty, a babe at each breast. The sight stirred something in him he'd thought long dead, not desire, but a deep, aching tenderness. "Thank you," she said simply. Most men would have ridden on. "Most men are fools," Amos replied, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. He cleared his throat. "You got names for them." "Emma and Grace, my mother's name and my grandmother's." She stroked their downy heads with trembling fingers. "Mr. Walker, Amos Walker." "Mr. Walker, I need to tell you, in case I don't..." She paused, gathering strength. "Their father is Samuel Carter. His family has a ranch near Cedar Ridge. Big place, lots of cattle. When I couldn't give him sons after 3 years of marriage, he took up with a saloon girl. When these 2 came along..." She shrugged. The gesture costs her. "He said he was done with me, left me at his brother's place, but they didn't want another mouth to feed. His brother, Marcus, put me on a wagon heading west, said there was a convent that took in fallen women. The driver robbed me 2 days ago, left me on the trail." Amos felt rage building in his gut. He'd known plenty of hard men in his time, men who'd kill for gold or glory. But abandoning a woman and newborn babes, that was a special kind of evil. "You ain't fallen," he said firmly. "And you ain't dying, neither. Not if I have anything to say about it." She smiled then. "Just a little. You're a good man. Amos Walker, the Lord sent you to us." Amos wasn't so sure about the Lord's involvement. They'd been on the outs since his mother died, but he kept that to himself. Instead, he wet a cloth in the cool water and dabbed at her forehead. "Rest now. I'm going to ride to Martha Holloway's place, see if she can come help. She's birthed half the babies in the county." "Don't leave us," Maybelle said, panic creeping into her voice. "I'll be back before full dark. You have my word." He placed his pistol on the table beside the bed. "You know how to use this?" She nodded. "My daddy taught me." "Good. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for nobody but me or Martha." As he turned to go, her hand caught his. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" Amos looked down at her pale face, at the babies now sleeping peacefully against her chest, and found he didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Anyway, all he knew was that walking away wasn't an option. Not anymore. "Because someone should," he said finally, and headed out into the gathering dusk. The ride to Martha's seemed longer than usual, his mind churning over the situation he'd stumbled into. 3 more mouths to feed when he barely kept his own body and soul together. Scandal and gossip when folks found out. Maybe even trouble from the Carter family if they decided they wanted the girls after all, not out of love, but pride and possession. But underneath all the practical worries, something else stirred. For 15 years, Amos had lived for nothing but the next strike, the next nugget, the dream of gold that danced always just out of reach. Now, suddenly, he had a purpose beyond his own empty belly and empty pockets. Whether he wanted it or not, those 3 souls back in his cabin had become his responsibility. And Amos Walker had never been a man to shirk his responsibilities, no matter how unexpected they might be. As Buttercup carried him through the darkening hills toward Martha's homestead, Amos found himself praying for the first time in 20 years, not for gold or fortune, but for the strength to see this through. Whatever this turned out to be. Martha Holloway arrived like a force of nature, her gray hair pinned severely back and her capable hands already rolling up her sleeves before she'd properly dismounted from her mule. At 62, she'd birthed more babies and buried more folks than anyone else in the county, and she brooked no nonsense from man nor beast. "Land sakes, Amos Walker, what mess have you gotten yourself into now?" she demanded, taking in the scene inside the cabin with sharp eyes. The oil lamp cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the small space seem even smaller with 2 adults and 3 new souls crowding it. "Found them on the trail," Amos said simply, stepping back to give Martha room to work. "The mother's in a bad way." Martha's expression softened as she approached the bed where Maybelle lay, still clutching her daughters. The older woman's hands were gentle as she examined the young mother, clucking her tongue at what she found. "Child, you've been through the wars, haven't you?" Martha murmured. "Amos, I need more hot water, and tear up some clean cloth if you've got it. Your sheets will do if nothing else." For the next several hours, Martha worked with quiet efficiency while Amos followed her orders. He learned more about women's troubles than he'd ever wanted to know, but he kept his squeamishness to himself. When Martha needed him to hold the babies so she could tend to their mother properly, he took them awkwardly, afraid his big hands might hurt something so small and fragile. The twins were fascinating creatures. One, Emma, Mabel had said, had a slightly rounder face. Grace's chin came to more of a point, and she seemed to cry with more determination than her sister. They gripped his fingers with surprising strength, their rosebud mouths working even in sleep. "She'll live," Martha announced finally, washing her hands in the basin. "Though it was a near thing, another few hours on that trail." She shook her head. "That baby came too fast, tore her up inside, but she's young and strong. With proper care and rest, she'll heal. Relief flooded through Amos so suddenly his knees went weak. He hadn't realized until that moment how much the thought of Maybelle dying had terrified him. "Course, proper care is going to be the trick," Martha continued, fixing him with a stern look. "She can't be moved for at least 2 weeks, maybe more. And she'll need help with the babies. Twins are a handful for a healthy woman, let alone one recovering from what she's been through." "I'll manage," Amos said, though he had no earthly idea how. Martha snorted. "You'll manage, boy. You can't even manage to keep your cabin clean. And you think you can tend to a sick woman and 2 newborns." She was right, of course. His cabin bore all the marks of a bachelor's neglect: dirty dishes stacked by the wash basin, clothes draped over every surface, dust thick enough to plant seeds in covering the shelves. "I'll come by when I can," Martha said, her voice gentling. "And I'll send my granddaughter Lucy over tomorrow with some supplies. Girl's 15 and good with babies. She can help during the days, but Amos—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You know what people will say. Let them say it. It ain't just your reputation at stake now. That girl's been through enough without adding shame on top of it." Amos glanced over at the bed, where Maybelle had fallen into an exhausted sleep, even worn and pale. There was something about her that caught at him, maybe the determined set of her jaw, or the way she'd fought to stay conscious long enough to feed her babies. "What would you have me do, Martha, turn them out?" "No." Martha sighed and began packing her supplies back into her bag. "No, you did right. Bringing them here, just be careful. And maybe think about making things proper when she's well enough." The suggestion hung in the air between them. Marriage. To a woman he'd known less than a day, who came with 2 babies and Lord knew what other complications. A few days ago, the thought would have sent him running for the hills. Now, looking at those 3 souls depending on him, it didn't seem quite so outlandish. After Martha left, promising to return in the morning, Amos set about making the cabin more livable. He strung a rope across one corner and hung a blanket over it to create a small private space, cleared the table and washed the dishes, even swept the floor, raising clouds of dust that made him sneeze. The babies woke twice in the night, their cries piercing the darkness. Both times. Amos helped Maybelle sit up to nurse them, supporting her back with rolled blankets and trying not to notice the way pain flickered across her face with every movement. "I'm sorry," she whispered during the second feeding. "You must be exhausted." "Slept in worse places with worse company," he replied, which drew a weak smile from her. "Were you in the war?" "For a bit. Didn't care much for it." He didn't elaborate. And she didn't push. Some stories weren't meant for the small hours of the night. When dawn finally painted the windows gray, Amos made coffee and pondered his situation. He had maybe $20 in gold dust hidden in a tin beneath the floorboards, and credit at Garrison's good for another month's supplies, but that had been calculated for one man living lean, not a family of 4. He'd have to go back to the claim, work it harder than ever. The thought exhausted him before he'd even started. 15 years of breaking his back for a few flakes of gold. And now, when he needed a real strike more than ever, he had less time than ever to search for it. A knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Through the window, he saw a slip of a girl with Martha's same determined chin sitting atop a cart pulled by an ancient donkey. "Mr. Walker Grandma sent me. I'm Lucy Holloway." Amos opened the door and helped her unload the cart. Martha had been generous cloth for diapers, a pot of stew, fresh bread, eggs, and most precious of all, several bottles of goat's milk with rubber nipples attached. "For when the mother's milk ain't enough," Lucy explained, showing him how to warm the bottles in hot water. Twins are hungry little things. She was a godsend over the next days, while Amos worked to reinforce his claim stakes and pan for what little gold the stream might yield. Lucy tended to Maybelle and the babies with quiet competence. She showed Maybelle how to bathe the infants without getting their cord stumps wet, How to swaddle them tight so they'd sleep better. How to tell when they were hungry versus when they just wanted comfort. Maybelle grew stronger each day, color returning to her cheeks and strength to her voice. She insisted on doing what she could, mending Amos's clothes while she sat in bed, singing soft lullabies to the babies, even attempting to cook when Lucy helped her to the chair by the fire. You don't need to earn your keep, Amos told her one evening when he found her darning his socks by lamplight, the babies sleeping in a makeshift cradle he'd fashioned from a packing crate. I need to be useful, she replied, not looking up from her work. All my life, folks told me what I was worth based on what I could give them. First my daddy, wanting sons to help with the farm. Then Samuel, wanting sons to carry on his name. Now, she paused, needle suspended in air. I don't know what I'm worth anymore. You're worth more than any of them deserved, Amos said firmly. The vehemence in his own voice surprised him. She did look up then, those winter blue eyes searching his face. You don't even know me. I know enough. They sat in companionable silence after that, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the babies. It was the kind of peace Amos hadn't known he'd been missing, the kind that made a man's heart settle into his chest like it had finally found where it belonged. But peace never lasted long in the territories. Lucy brought the news on her 4th day of helping. Mr. Walker, Grandma wanted me to warn you. There's been men in town asking about a woman with twin babies. Rough-looking sorts. They say she stole something that belongs to them. Amos's jaw tightened. She didn't steal nothing except herself. Grandma figured as much. She told them she hadn't seen nor heard of any such woman. But Mr. Garrison at the trading post has a looser tongue, especially when silver crosses his palm. Which meant they had maybe a day, 2 at most, before trouble came calling. Amos looked around his small cabin, barely defensible, isolated, with 3 souls who couldn't run if they needed to. Thank you for the warning. Lucy, best you don't come back for a few days. I don't want you getting caught up in whatever's coming. The girl nodded gravely. Grandma said to tell you she's praying for you all, and that, if you need sanctuary, her root cellar's right spacious. After Lucy left, Amos told Maybelle about the men. Her face went white, but her chin lifted in that way he was beginning to recognize meant she was preparing for battle. It'll be Marcus, Samuel's brother. He must have realized the babies could be worth something after all. Married off young or sold as household help. Her voice turned bitter. The Carter family never let anything go they thought they owned. They don't own you or those girls. Law might say different. I'm still Samuel's wife, abandoned or not. And the children. The law's a long way from here, Amos said, and possession is 9/10 of it anyway. He spent the rest of the day preparing, loaded his rifle and pistol, placed them strategic around the cabin, barricaded the windows with the heavy shutters he usually only used in winter, filled every bucket and pot with water in case of fire. It was an old trick, burning folks out when you couldn't get to them any other way. That night, he sat up keeping watch while Maybelle dozed fitfully, starting awake every time one of the babies stirred. The oil lamp burned low, casting long shadows that jumped at every small sound from outside. You should leave, Maybelle said suddenly into the darkness. Take Buttercup and go. They won't hurt us. We're property, after all. Worth more alive than dead. Already told you, I ain't much for running. This isn't your fight. Amos thought about that, about how quickly these 3 had burrowed into his life like they'd always belonged there, about how empty his cabin would feel without baby cries and Maybelle's soft humming, about how he'd gone from wanting nothing more than gold to wanting nothing more than to keep them safe. Maybe not, he said finally, but I'm making it mine anyway. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, so soft he almost missed it. Why are you so good to us? He didn't have an answer that would make sense to anyone. Maybe not even to himself. All he knew was that finding them on that trail had changed something fundamental in him, like a stream changing course after a landslide. The gold that had glittered so bright in his dreams seemed dull as pyrite compared to the light in Maybelle's eyes when she looked at her daughters. "Get some rest," he said instead of answering. "Tomorrow might be a long day." But tomorrow was already breaking over the mountains, painting the sky the color of blood and promise. Whatever came with it, Amos Walker would be ready. He'd spent half his life digging in hard ground for treasure. Now, finally, he had something worth fighting for that wasn't buried in the earth, but breathing right here in his cabin, and he'd be damned if he'd let anyone take it away. The whispers started like tumbleweeds, rolling through the settlement with gathering momentum. By the time Amos made his monthly trip to Garrison's trading post, he could feel the weight of eyes on him before he'd even dismounted from Buttercup. "Well, well, if it ain't the Good Samaritan himself," drawled Jake Henley from his usual spot on the porch, whittling a piece of pine into nothing. "Heard you've taken in some strays, Walker." Amos ignored him, tying Buttercup to the hitching post with deliberate care. He'd expected this, had braced himself for it during the long ride to town. What he hadn't expected was how much the snide tone would rake against his nerves like sandpaper. Inside the trading post, the usual collection of miners and drifters fell silent as he entered. Garrison himself, a weasel-faced man who'd never met a piece of gossip he wouldn't spread for profit, smiled unctuously from behind the counter. "Amos, haven't seen you in a spell. How's that claim treating you?" Same as always. Amos placed his list on the counter. "Need these supplies?" Garrison's eyes scanned the paper, his eyebrows climbing toward his receding hairline. "That's a mighty lot of flour and milk. Feeding an army out there." "Just fill the order. Garrison—" Sure, no offense meant." But the storekeeper's smile turned sly. "Though I did hear tell you've got yourself some house guests. A woman and babies, they say. Must be right Christian of you, taking in the needy like that." The way he said Christian made it sound like something dirty. Amos's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. "My business is my own." "Course it is. Though some folks are wondering what kind of business keeps a woman in a bachelor's cabin for going on 2 weeks now." Garrison leaned forward conspiratorially. "Not that I'm one to judge. Mind you, man gets lonely out in them hills." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a cheap cigar. Amos felt heat rise in his neck, the kind that preceded violence, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Garrison, I believe Mr. Walker asked you to fill his order, not flap your gums." Martha Holloway stood in the doorway like an avenging angel in gingham, her basket over one arm and her expression severe enough to strip paint. The loafers on the porch had scattered at her approach. Martha had tended their wounds and delivered their babies, and there wasn't a man among them brave enough to cross her. "Martha, I was just—" "I know exactly what you were doing, you gossiping old hen." She swept into the store, her skirts rustling with indignation. "And I'll thank you to keep your insinuations to yourself. That poor girl nearly died bringing those babies into the world. If Mr. Walker hadn't found her when he did, we'd be burying 3 souls instead of nursing them back to health." Garrison had the grace to look abashed, busying himself with gathering Amos's supplies. But the damage was done. Amos could feel it in the air, in the sidelong glances and whispered conversations that followed him as he loaded his purchases. "Don't let them bother you," Martha said quietly as they stepped outside. "Small minds need something to chew on, and a good deed done without thought of reward confuses them something terrible." "It ain't me I'm worried about," Amos replied. "Maybelle don't deserve their poison. She's been through enough." Martha's expression softened. "How is she?" "Stronger every day. Up and about now. Doing more than she should. Those babies are thriving too, getting fat as little piglets." "Good." Martha adjusted her basket. "I'll come by tomorrow with more supplies. And Amos, you might want to think about making arrangements soon. The talk will only get worse, and that girl needs protection from more than just gossip." She didn't elaborate, but Amos understood. The law might be far away, but social conventions had their own power out here. A woman's reputation, once ruined, could make her life near impossible. The ride back to the cabin felt longer than usual, his mind churning over Martha's words and the ugliness he'd encountered in town. He'd lived outside society's borders for so long. He'd forgotten how sharp its judgments could cut. He found Maybelle sitting in the doorway, taking advantage of the mild afternoon sun. The babies lay on a blanket beside her, kicking their legs and gurgling at the sky. The picture they made, golden light on auburn hair, the soft curve of her smile as she watched her daughters, stopped him cold. "You're back," she said, shading her eyes to look up at him. "Was starting to worry." "Town was busy," he said shortly, dismounting and beginning to unload the supplies. Something in his tone must have alerted her. "What happened?" "Nothing worth repeating." She stood, wincing slightly. She was still healing, though she tried to hide it. "Amos Walker, you're a terrible liar. What are they saying?" He wanted to protect her from it, to build walls high enough that the world's ugliness couldn't touch her. But the set of her jaw told him she wouldn't accept comfortable lies. "What you'd expect them to say, about a man and woman living under the same roof without benefit of marriage." Color rose in her cheeks, but her gaze didn't waver. "I see. And what do you say?" "That my business is my own." "That's not an answer." He set down the sack of flour he had been holding, turning to face her fully. "What would you have me say?" "Maybelle, that I found you dying and did what any decent man would do. That won't satisfy them. They want scandal and sin, not simple human kindness." "Is that all this is?" Her voice was soft, almost lost in the rustling of the pines. "Kindness." The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Amos looked at her, really looked at her. Not the broken woman he'd found on the trail, but the one standing before him now. Strong, despite her trials, fierce in her love for her children, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional prettiness and everything to do with the light that burned inside her. "No," he said finally. "No, it ain't just kindness." Before either could say more, Grace started crying, followed immediately by Emma. The spell broken, Maybelle hurried to tend them, and Amos threw himself into storing the supplies with perhaps more vigor than necessary. That evening, as they sat by the fire with the babies finally sleeping, Maybelle brought up the subject neither had wanted to broach. "I should leave," she said quietly. "You've done so much already, and I won't have your reputation ruined on my account." "Where would you go?" "I don't know. West, maybe California, somewhere they don't know my story." "With 2 babies and no money, winter coming on?" Amos shook his head. "That's fool talk." "Then what do you suggest?" Frustration crept into her voice. "I won't be the cause of—" "Marry me." The words fell out of his mouth without thought, surprising them both. Maybelle's needlework dropped from nerveless fingers. What? Now that he'd said it, Amos found the idea settling into his mind like it had always belonged there. "Marry me. Make it proper in the eyes of the law and the gossips. Give those girls a name and a home." "You don't. We barely know each other. I know you're brave. Know you love those babies more than life itself. Know you darn a mean sock and make coffee that don't taste like mud." He paused, gathering courage. "Know my cabin feels like home for the first time since I built it, with you and them in it." Tears glittered in her eyes. "Amos, I can't ask that of you, to saddle yourself with another man's children, a used-up woman with nothing to offer." "You ain't used up." His voice came out rougher than intended. "And you got plenty to offer. Just maybe not what men like Samuel Carter could see." She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Would it be a real marriage or just for appearances? The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought that far ahead, had only seen a solution to their immediate problem. But looking at her now, firelight playing across her features, he knew his answer. "Real as you want it to be," he said. "I ain't the kind of man to demand what ain't freely given, but I'd be proud to call you wife, Maybelle Carter, proud to raise those girls as my own." Maybelle Walker, she corrected softly, and his heart jumped at the sound of his name paired with hers. If we're doing this, I don't want to carry his name anymore. Then it's settled. She looked at him then, really looked at him. This gruff miner who'd saved her life, who'd opened his home without thought of reward, who even now was offering her more than she'd ever dared hope for. Why? She asked, echoing her question from that first night. Why are you so good to us? This time, he had an answer. Because somewhere along the way, between dirty diapers and midnight feedings and you singing those babies to sleep, I realized something. I've been digging in the ground for 15 years, looking for treasure. Turns out it was waiting for me on that trail, wrapped in a blood-stained calico dress. The tears came then, rolling silently down her cheeks. But she was smiling too, a real smile that transformed her whole face. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you, Amos Walker. He reached across the space between them, taking her hand in his work-roughened one. It was small and soft despite the calluses of her own hard life, and it fit in his like it was meant to be there. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind whispered secrets through the pines, but inside the cabin, lit by firelight and warmed by something deeper than flame, a family was being forged from the broken pieces of 3 lives. The gossips could talk all they wanted. Amos had found something worth more than their good opinion, worth more than all the gold hidden in these hills. He'd found a reason to build something permanent in this impermanent land. And he'd be damned if he'd let anyone, gossiping storekeepers, sanctimonious townspeople, or ghosts from Maybelle's past, take it away from him. Tomorrow, he'd ride to the circuit preacher's place, arrange for a wedding. It would be simple. Nothing like the society affairs back east. But it would be theirs. And it would be real. And that was all that mattered. For now, though. He sat holding Maybelle's hand while she held his. 2 people who'd found each other in the wilderness and discovered that sometimes the greatest treasures weren't buried at all. They were sitting right beside you, breathing and living and making your heart feel like it had finally found its way home. The sound of horses approaching at dusk 3 days later made Amos's blood run cold. He'd been splitting wood behind the cabin, shirt soaked with honest sweat, when the rumble of hooves carried on the evening air. Too many horses for friendly callers. Maybelle, he called quietly, setting down his axe. Take the girls into the root cellar. She appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her hands from the bread she'd been kneading. One look at his face, and she understood, without a word. She gathered the twins from their cradle and disappeared toward the hidden entrance he'd shown her that morning, just in case. Amos retrieved his rifle from beside the door and checked the load. His pistol sat heavy on his hip. He'd fought in the war, brief as his service was. He knew how to kill a man if it came to that, but knowing and wanting were different beasts entirely. 5 riders came into view, dark shapes against the dying light. The man in front sat his horse like he owned the world and everyone in it. Broad shoulders, expensive hat, a face that might have been handsome if not for the cruel twist to his mouth. Marcus Carter. Had to be. He had Samuel's look about him, but harder, meaner. The kind of man who'd put a woman and newborn babies on a wagon to nowhere and sleep sound that night. Evening, Marcus called out, reining up just outside rifle range. Smart. The men with him spread out in a half circle, ranch hands by the look of them. Hard-bitten men who do whatever they were paid to do. State your business and move on, Amos replied, keeping the rifle barrel pointed at the ground but ready. Now, is that any way to greet visitors? Marcus dismounted with studied casualness, but Amos noted how his hand never strayed far from the gun at his hip. I believe you've got something that belongs to my family. Nothing here but what's mine. That's so? Marcus took a few steps closer, his spurs jangling in the quiet. Funny thing, my sister-in-law went missing a few weeks back. Took some valuable property with her. Trail led us here. Don't know nothing about that. Marcus smiled. cold as winter moonlight. Come now, Mr. Walker. Isn't it the whole territory's talking about the hermit miner who took in a woman and twin babies? You wouldn't be calling all those good folks liars, would you? I'm calling you unwelcome. That's all that matters on my land. One of the ranch hands shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. Want us to search the place, Mr. Carter? Now, Jenkins. Let's keep this civilized. But Marcus's eyes glittered with something far from civil. Mr. Walker, you seem like a reasonable man. Those children carry Carter blood. My brother may have been hasty in his decision, but family is family. We've come to collect what's ours. Children ain't property. The law might disagree. Their mother abandoned her lawful husband. That makes her a runaway wife, and them bastards in the eyes of the court. Amos felt rage building in his chest, hot and dangerous. Watch your tongue. Or what? Marcus spread his hands. You'll shoot 5 men in cold blood. That'll surely help your situation. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here. Hand over the woman and the brats, and we'll ride away. No harm done. Hell, I'll even toss in $50 for your trouble. Get off my land. Marcus's friendly mask slipped. You don't want to cross me, Walker. I've got money, men, and the law on my side. What have you got, a played-out claim and a misplaced sense of chivalry? I've got a clear conscience. That's more than you can say. Conscience. Marcus spat the word like it tasted bad. Let me paint you a picture. Tomorrow, I ride to the county seat, file a complaint about my stolen property. The sheriff comes calling. He's a friend of mine. By the way, you resist, you hang, you don't resist. You still lose them. Either way, I get what I came for. Then why not wait for your friend the sheriff? Marcus's smile turned predatory. Because I'm a charitable man, willing to let bygones be bygones if we handle this quiet-like. But my patience is wearing thin. A baby's cry pierced the evening air. Just for a moment, quickly muffled, but enough. Marcus's head snapped toward the sound, and Amos saw the triumph in his eyes. Well, sounds like someone's awake. He took another step forward. Last chance. Walker, hand them over peaceable, or things get unpleasant. Amos raised the rifle, settling the stock against his shoulder. Things are already unpleasant. You've got 10 seconds to get gone. The ranch hands tensed, hands moving to weapons, but Marcus held up a hand, studying Amos with those cold eyes. You'd die for them. A woman who ain't yours and whelps that ain't your blood. I've died for worse causes. Amos replied, 10 seconds. The moment stretched taut as wire. One of the horses stamped nervously. Somewhere in the distance, a screech owl called, lonely and wild. Then Marcus laughed, short and sharp. You've got sand. Walker, I'll give you that. He turned back to his horse, mounting with easy grace. But this ain't over, not by a long shot. It is if you're smart, Amos said. Those girls are under my protection now. Come after them again, and I won't be so polite about asking you to leave. Your protection. Marcus gathered his reins. Tell me something. Walker, you fixing to marry that whore, or just keeping her warm for the winter? The shot split the air before Amos fully registered pulling the trigger. Marcus's hat flew off his head. A neat hole punched through the crown. The horses danced and snorted as the ranch hands reached for iron. But Marcus held up a hand again. Next one goes lower, Amos said, already levering another round into the chamber. Marcus bent to retrieve his ruined hat, examining it with something almost like admiration. Like I said, sand. He looked back at Amos. But sand ain't enough to stop what's coming. You got a week, maybe 2. Then I come back with papers and badges and more men than you can shoot. Think on that while you're playing house. They rode away in a thunder of hooves and dust, leaving Amos standing in his dooryard with the rifle still raised. Only when they disappeared over the ridge did he lower it, his hands suddenly shaking with delayed reaction. They're gone, he called out. "You can come up now." Maybelle emerged from the root cellar like a ghost, the babies clutched tight against her chest. Even in the failing light, he could see she'd been crying. "I heard it all," she said. "Amos, I won't let you die for us. We'll leave tonight, head west, lose ourselves in California. Maybe—" "We'll do no such thing." He set the rifle aside and went to her, gently taking Emma while she adjusted her hold on Grace. "We're getting married tomorrow, just like we planned. Let him come with his papers and badges. A man's got a right to protect his legal wife and daughters." "They're not your daughters." "They will be, once I sign the papers. Legal adoption. Martha knows a lawyer in the county seat who'll do it proper." Maybelle stared at him. "You do that, give them your name." "My name ain't much, but it's better than leaving them with none at all." She was quiet for a long moment, looking down at Grace's sleeping face. "He'll come back, with more men, like he said, and that sheriff he mentioned. Then we'll face them when they come, together. I'm not worth dying for, Amos Walker." He shifted Emma to one arm and used his free hand to gently tilt Maybelle's chin up, making her meet his eyes. "That ain't your decision to make, and for what it's worth, I disagree." She searched his face in the gathering darkness. "I don't understand you." "Nothing to understand. Man finds something worth fighting for. He fights. Simple as that." "Nothing about this is simple." "Sure it is." He adjusted Emma's weight, marveling again at how light she was, how fragile. "Before you came, I had nothing but a hole in the ground and empty dreams. Now I've got a reason to wake up in the morning that ain't about gold. Got a future that means something. That's worth any risk." A tear tracked down her cheek. "What if we lose?" "Then we lose together. But I don't plan on losing." He started toward the cabin, Maybelle falling into step beside him. "First thing tomorrow, we ride to Reverend Palmer's place, make this official, then to the lawyer. After that," he shrugged, "after that, we make ready for whatever comes." Inside the cabin, they settled the babies back in their cradle. Maybelle lit the oil lamp while Amos barred the door and checked the windows. The familiar evening routine felt different now, charged with the knowledge of the threat hanging over them. "He called me a whore," Maybelle said quietly, not looking at him. "Maybe he's right. A decent woman would have found another way. Wouldn't have brought trouble to your door. A decent woman would have done exactly what you did, whatever it took to save her children." Amos moved to stand beside her. "And you didn't bring trouble to my door. I invited it in, eyes wide open. Would do it again, too." She turned to face him then, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "I don't love you," she said. "I want to be honest about that. You deserve better than a woman who's marrying you for protection." "I know," he said simply. "Didn't expect otherwise, but maybe love's like gold. Sometimes you find it sudden, like a nugget in your pan. Other times you gotta work for it, patient-like. Dig through a lot of dirt before you reach the vein. And if you never find it, then I'll still have had the digging, still have had you and the girls in my life, making it worth something. That's more than I had before." She reached up, touching his weathered cheek with soft fingers. "You're a strange man. Amos Walker." "Been called worse." That drew a small smile from her. "I'll try," she said. "To be a good wife. I mean, to make this work. You deserve that much. Just be yourself. That's all I want." Later, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread, they sat by the fire planning for the morning. The marriage, the adoption papers, supplies they'd need if they had to fort up against a siege. Practical talk that carefully skirted around the violence that might be coming. But underneath the words ran a current of something else. Every time their eyes met across the table, every accidental brush of hands, every shared glance at the sleeping babies, something was building between them. Fragile as spring ice, but there nonetheless. When Maybelle finally retired to her curtained corner, Amos sat up with his rifle. keeping watch. He thought about Marcus Carter's cold eyes, about the men who'd follow orders for money, about the corrupt sheriff who'd use the law as a weapon. Then he thought about Maybelle's smile when she looked at her daughters, about the way she hummed while she worked, about the fierce courage it had taken for her to survive what she'd survived. Marcus was right about one thing. Amos would die for them if it came to that, but he planned to live for them instead, to build something lasting in this temporary world. Tomorrow, they'd stand before God and the Reverend and make promises. Not the promises of young lovers with stars in their eyes, but the promises of two people who'd seen the worst life had to offer and chose to face what came next together. It wasn't the stuff of fairy tales, but it was real, and it was theirs, and that made it worth any fight that was coming. In her corner, he heard Maybelle whisper a soft lullaby to one of the babies who'd stirred. The sound filled the cabin with a peace that made mockery of all Marcus Carter's threats. Let him come, Amos thought. Let him bring his papers and his badges and his hired guns. He'd find more than he bargained for in this little cabin. He'd find a family and families. Amos was learning. Didn't give up easy. The night wrapped around the cabin like a blanket, thick with pine scent and the promise of frost. Amos sat by the dying fire, unable to sleep despite the weariness in his bones. Tomorrow would bring changes. Marriage, new names on legal papers, a family forged from necessity and growing affection. But tonight, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, his thoughts wandered paths he rarely let them travel. A soft sound made him look up. Maybelle stood at the edge of the curtained space, wrapped in the quilt he'd given her that first night. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, catching the firelight like spun copper. "Can't sleep either," she asked softly. "Too much rattling around in my head." She moved closer, settling into the chair across from him. "Are you having second thoughts about tomorrow?" "No." The answer came quick and sure. I should be. A woman with any sense would be." She pulled the quilt tighter. "But sense hasn't served me well so far. Maybe it's time to try something else." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the pop and hiss of the dying embers. One of the babies stirred, making small sounds before settling again. "Tell me about her," Maybelle said suddenly. "The woman who hurt you." Amos stiffened. "What makes you think—" "A man doesn't live alone in the mountains for 15 years without reason. And the way you sometimes look, like you're seeing ghosts." She trailed off. "You don't have to tell me. I just thought, if we're to be married, maybe we should know each other's sorrows." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the fire, "Sarah, her name was Sarah. We were young, planning to marry. I went off to war thinking I was some kind of hero. Came back to find her married to my brother. Said she couldn't wait, didn't know if I'd return." He shrugged. "Can't say I blamed her. War changed me, made me harder. Maybe she saw that coming before I did. I'm sorry." "Long time ago now. Water under the bridge." He looked at her. "What about you? Was it always bad with Samuel?" "No." The admission seemed to surprise her. "At first he was charming, brought me flowers, promised me the world. It was after the wedding that things changed, when months passed and my belly stayed flat. Then years." She stared at her hands. "He said I was broken, useless. His mother said I must have sin in my heart, that God was punishing me. When I finally did conceive, I was so happy. Then the midwife said twins, and I knew as sure as sunrise they'd be girls." "How could you know that?" A sad smile touched her lips. "My grandmother used to say the women in our family carried daughters like promises, sons like surprises. Every woman as far back as anyone could remember had girls first. Samuel knew it too. It's why he chose me. Thought he could break the pattern. When he couldn't." She shrugged. "You saw what he did. His loss. Is it?" She looked at him directly. "2 more mouths to feed. No sons to help with the heavy work. Scandal following us like shadows. How is that anything but loss? Amos leaned forward, his voice intense. Because those girls will grow up knowing they're wanted, loved. They'll be strong like their mama, and they'll change this territory just by being in it. That's worth more than any sons. Tears glittered in her eyes. You really believe that? I do. She reached across the space between them, taking his hand. Her fingers were small and cool in his rough palm. I dreamed of gold once, too, she said softly. Not actual gold, but the fairy tale. A prince who'd sweep me away to a castle. Instead, I got Samuel and his cruelty. Learned real quick that princes don't exist. Good thing I ain't no prince then. That startled a laugh from her. No, you're something better. You're real. He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses there with his thumb. Working hands, survivor's hands. Mabel, I need you to know something. Tomorrow, when we stand before the Reverend, I'm going to mean them vows. Every word, for better or worse, richer or poorer, all of it. Even though I don't love you. Even though... He squeezed her hand gently. Love ain't the only thing that makes a marriage. There's respect, partnership, shared purpose, building something together. Love might come later, or it might not. Either way, I'll be content. She was quiet, studying his face in the firelight. Then, so soft he almost missed it. What if it's already starting to come? His heart stuttered in his chest. What? I watch you with the girls, the way you hold them like they're made of spun glass, the way you sing to them when you think I'm not listening, horrible off-key songs about miners and mules. A smile ghosted across her face. I see how hard you work, not for gold anymore, but for us, how you treat me like I matter, like my thoughts and feelings count for something. No man's ever done that before. That ain't love, that's just common decency. Maybe, but it feels like more. She pulled her hand back, wrapping the quilt tighter. I'm scared. Amos, scared of hoping again. Scared of building something just to watch it torn down. Marcus won't give up. Men like him never do. Then we'll be scared together, but we won't stop building. A log collapsed in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. In the brief flare of light, Amos saw something in Mabel's eyes that made his breath catch. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The seed that might, with tending, grow into something strong. I should try to sleep, she said, standing. Tomorrow's a big day. Mabel. She paused, looking back. That dream you had about gold. Maybe neither of us found what we went looking for, but sometimes what you find instead is worth more than what you lost. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her tired face. He dreamed of gold in the silent west, she said softly, but her touch ignited a passion fiercer than any treasure. Amos's breath caught. Where'd you hear that? You talk in your sleep sometimes. That first week, when you sat up with me through the worst of it, you said it more than once. She tilted her head. What does it mean? He felt heat rise in his face, grateful for the dim light. Just foolish thoughts. Pay it no mind. But she stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap Martha had brought. Not foolish. Beautiful. Like poetry. Her hand touched his cheek. Featherlight. Is that how you see me, as treasure? Yes, the word came out rough. From the first moment. She leaned down and kissed his forehead, soft as a whisper. Then I'll try to be worthy of it. She disappeared behind the curtain before he could respond, leaving him sitting stunned by the dying fire. His skin tingled where her lips had touched, and his heart beat like he'd run 10 miles uphill. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams, not of gold this time, but of auburn hair and winter blue eyes, of baby laughter and a future that stretched out bright despite the shadows gathering around them. Morning came too soon, bringing with it the bustle of preparation. Mabel had salvaged her best dress, a simple blue calico that Martha had helped her mend. Amos put on his church clothes, stiff from disuse, and tried to tame his unruly hair with water and hope. The babies seemed to sense the importance of the day, fussing more than usual. But finally, they were ready. Amos had rigged a sort of carrying sling to the saddle so Maybelle could ride while holding both girls secure. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Reverend Palmer lived 6 miles east, in a proper house with glass windows and a white picket fence that his wife tended with devotion. He greeted them at the door, a tall scarecrow of a man with kind eyes behind wire spectacles. "Amos Walker, been a spell since you darkened my door, and this must be—" He paused, taking in Maybelle and the babies with a gentle smile. "The family I've been hearing about." "Reverend," Amos said, hat in hand. "We've come to be married today, if you'll do it." Palmer's eyebrows rose. "Today, well, that's sudden. Usually folks like to have the banns read, arrange for witnesses." "It can't wait," Maybelle said, lifting her chin. "Please, Reverend, we need God's blessing on our union." Something in her tone, or perhaps the desperate hope in her eyes, swayed him. "Well, the Lord's work doesn't always follow man's timeline. Come in, Mrs. Palmer. We're having a wedding." The ceremony was simple, held in the parlor with Mrs. Palmer and their eldest daughter as witnesses. Reverend Palmer spoke the old words with gravity, about love and honor, faithfulness and fortitude. When he asked if anyone knew reason why these two should not be joined, Amos half expected Marcus Carter to burst through the door. But there was only silence, broken by Emma's hungry cry. "Do you, Amos Michael Walker, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The words came strong and sure. "Do you, Maybelle Grace Thompson Carter, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Amos noticed how she paused before saying Carter, how her voice strengthened when she answered, "I do." The ring. Amos produced it from his pocket, not gold, but silver, carved from an old Mexican peso he'd carried for luck. He'd worked on it by firelight these past nights, smoothing and shaping it into something resembling a wedding band. It wasn't fancy, but it was all he had. Maybelle's eyes widened when she saw it. "You made this?" "Best I could do on short notice." She held out her hand, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. "By the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." They both froze, in all their planning. Neither had thought about this moment. Then Maybelle rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, soft and quick, but with a promise of more. "Well then," Reverend Palmer beamed, "let me be the first to congratulate Mr. and Mrs. Walker. May God bless your union with many happy years." The ride to the lawyer took the rest of the morning. Mr. Josiah Crane was a dried-up stick of a man who looked at them over his spectacles with shrewd assessment. "Adoption papers for twin girls, you say, and you've just married their mother." "That's right," Amos said firmly. "Want it all legal and proper." Crane pulled out forms, his pen scratching across paper. "The biological father." "Abandoned them," Maybelle said. "Left us to die." "I see. And you're willing to sign away all claim to them. Mrs. Walker, allow your husband full parental rights." "We're married. His rights are my rights." More scratching, more questions. Finally, Crane pushed papers across the desk. "Sign here and here, both of you." They signed. Amos's bold scrawl next to Maybelle's careful script. Emma Walker. Grace Walker. His daughters now, in the eyes of the law. "There's one more thing," Amos said, pulling out a leather pouch. "Want to register a claim transfer, moving my mining claim into my wife's name." Crane's eyebrows climbed. "That's unusual. Most men keep property in their own name." "Most men ain't me." Maybelle turned to stare at him. Amos, what are you doing? Protecting what's ours. Claim can't be seized for my debts if it's in your name. Can't be taken if something happens to me. You'll always have land. Always have a home. Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not, but a man provides for his family, even against maybes. She was crying now, silent tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. Crane, seemingly immune to emotional displays, simply prepared more papers. By the time they left his office, the sun was high overhead. They'd done it. Married, adopted, secured. Whatever Marcus Carter brought now, he'd be fighting more than a lone miner and a runaway woman. He'd be fighting a family, legally bound and protected by law. The ride home was quiet, each lost in thought. But as they crested the ridge that looked down on their valley, Maybelle reached over and took Amos's free hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For seeing us as treasure worth fighting for giving us your name. For..." She paused, searching for words. "For making me believe in good men again." He squeezed her fingers, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Below them, the cabin sat peaceful in the afternoon sun, smoke rising from the chimney where he'd left the fire banked. Home, their home now, all of theirs. Whatever came next, Marcus's threats, society's judgment, the long work of building a life together, they'd face it as husband and wife, as family. And for a man who'd spent 15 years chasing fool's gold in cold streams, that felt like the richest strike of all. 10 days of peace, that's what they had before the storm broke. 10 days of learning to be husband and wife, of Amos discovering that Maybelle hummed when she cooked and that she liked her coffee with 2 sugars when they could afford it. 10 days of Maybelle finding out that her new husband carved little wooden animals when his hands needed busy work, and that he knew all the constellations by name. 10 days of the babies growing round-cheeked and bright-eyed, of first smiles that might have been gas but felt like miracles anyway. Then, on a morning crisp with autumn frost, the peace shattered. Amos was checking his trap lines when he heard the horses, many horses, moving fast. He abandoned the rabbit he'd been freeing and ran, his boots crushing frozen grass, rifle clutched in sweaty hands. They were already at the cabin when he crested the hill. 8 men this time, maybe 10. Marcus Carter sat his horse like a general surveying a battlefield, but it was the man beside him that made Amos's blood run cold. Sheriff Tom Brennan. Amos knew him by reputation, a man who'd sell his own mother for the right price, who used his badge as a tool for the highest bidder. He was talking to Maybelle through the barely cracked door, gesturing with papers in his meaty fist. Amos approached carefully, rifle ready but not raised. No sense giving them excuse to shoot him for threatening a lawman. "In court order, Mrs. Carter," Brennan was saying. "You'll need to come with us. Bring the children." "My name is Mrs. Walker." Maybelle's voice came steady through the gap. "And you'll need more than papers to take me anywhere." "Now, don't be difficult. This here's a legal warrant for your arrest, abandonment of your lawful husband, theft of property." "My wife hasn't stolen anything." Amos stepped into view, watching how hands moved to weapons. "Morning. Sheriff, bit far from your jurisdiction. Aren't you..." Brennan turned, his pockmarked face splitting in an oily smile. "Walker, been hearing about you, and no, I ain't outside my jurisdiction. Got special dispensation from the territorial judge to pursue fleeing criminals." "No criminals here, just a family trying to live peaceful." "That's so." Marcus dismounted, taking the papers from Brennan. "Says here different. Maybelle Carter, wanted for abandonment and theft, namely 2 female children belonging to the Carter estate." "Those are my daughters," Amos said evenly. "Legal and proper. Got the papers to prove it." "Papers," Marcus laughed. "You mean that sham marriage Reverend Palmer performed, the adoption scribbled up by that drunk Crane?" He shook his head. Money talks louder than paper. Walker, Judge Morrison sees things my way. Your marriage is invalid, performed under false pretenses. The adoption's worthless. And you, he smiled coldly, you're harboring a fugitive. Maybelle opened the door wider, stepping onto the porch. She'd dressed carefully that morning in her good dress, hair pinned up proper, but the rifle in her hands was all business. "I'm no man's property," she said clearly, "and neither are my daughters. You want to take us? You'll have to kill us first." "Maybelle," Amos warned, but she stood firm. "No, I'm done running, done being scared." She looked directly at Marcus. "You tell your brother if he wanted a wife and children. He should have treated us better than cattle. Tell him I'd rather die free than live one more day under the Carter name." Marcus's face darkened. "That can be arranged." Now, Brennan interjected, clearly uncomfortable with how things were progressing. "No need for violence. Walker, you seem like a reasonable man. You really want to die for some woman you've known a few weeks? Turn her over, and we'll forget you were involved. Hell, Marcus here might even make it worth your while." "Get off my land." Amos moved to stand beside his wife. "All of you, now." "Can't do that." Brennan sighed theatrically. "Got a duty to uphold the law. Your law, not mine." "It's the only law that matters." From inside the cabin came the thin wail of one of the babies. Emma, Amos thought. She always woke first. The sound seemed to galvanize Marcus. "Enough talk." He turned to his men. "Jenkins, Roberts, get those brats. The rest of you, take the woman. Kill Walker if he resists." Everything happened fast then. Jenkins and Roberts dismounted, moving toward the cabin. Amos raised his rifle. "Stop right there." They didn't stop. The shot was impossibly loud in the morning air. Jenkins spun and fell, clutching his shoulder. Roberts froze. Everyone froze, except Maybelle. With movements Martha had taught her, she worked the lever of her rifle and fired. Robert's hat flew off, the bullet passing close enough to part his hair. "Next one goes between your eyes," she said calmly. "You shot my man." Marcus's face was purple with rage. "He'll live," Amos said, keeping his rifle trained on the group. "Which is more than I can say for the next one who moves wrong." Brennan had gone pale beneath his whiskers. "Now hold on. Nobody said nothing about gunplay. Marcus, maybe we should—" "Shut up!" Marcus's hand hovered near his pistol. "You think you've won something here. Walker, you've got 2 rifles and righteous anger. I've got 8 men and time. We'll starve you out if we have to." "Try it." It was a standoff, tense as a stretched wire. Jenkins moaned on the ground. One of the horses stamped nervously. Inside, both babies were crying now. Then, from the tree line, a new voice called out, "That's about enough, I think." Everyone turned. Martha Holloway emerged from the woods, and she wasn't alone. Behind her came a half-dozen others, neighbors Amos barely knew, men and women who'd never said more than 10 words to him in all his years here. Tom Garrett with his ancient buffalo gun, the widow Morrison and her 2 grown sons, even old Pete Sanchez, who rarely left his goat ranch. "Martha," Brennan said weakly, "this is law business, no concern of yours." "Everything in this valley concerns me. Tom Brennan." Martha's voice could have etched glass. "Especially when armed men threaten women and babies." "We ain't threatening nobody, just serving legal papers." "Legal?" She spat the word. "I've known you 30 years. Tom, remember when you were just a boy and I set your broken arm? You were honest then. What happened?" Brennan couldn't meet her eyes. "And you," she turned on Marcus, "riding in here like some tin-pot emperor, thinking money makes you God. Your brother abandoned that girl and those babies, left them to die. Any claim he had ended there. The law says—" "I don't give a tinker's damn what your bought judge says." Martha moved to stand with Amos and Maybelle. This is our community. We decide what's right. More neighbors were appearing now, drawn by the gunshot, or maybe by some frontier telegraph Amos didn't understand. Soon, Marcus's men were outnumbered 2-1. "This is a mistake," Marcus said. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. "You're interfering with lawful—" "Mr." Tom Garrett interrupted, his buffalo gun casual in his arms. "I've lived in these mountains 40 years, killed bears, fought Indians, survived 2 wives and 6 children. You think your fancy papers scare me?" A murmur of agreement ran through the gathered neighbors. Amos felt something loosen in his chest. These people, who'd gossiped and whispered, who'd judged and stayed distant. When it mattered, they'd come. Marcus looked around, calculating odds. Whatever he saw in those weathered faces made him step back. "This isn't over," he said to Amos. "I'll be back, with more men, real lawmen, federal marshals if I have to. You can't fight forever." "Maybe not," Amos replied, "but we can fight today." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then, "Get Jenkins. We're leaving." They mounted up, Jenkins helped into his saddle by Roberts. As they prepared to ride out, Brennan paused. "Walker, word of advice. Take your family and run. Tonight. Marcus, don't forget. And he don't forgive. This ain't over." "I know." They watched the riders disappear over the ridge. Only when the dust settled did Amos lower his rifle, his hands suddenly shaking. "Well," Martha brushed off her skirts. "That was exciting. Tom, why don't you and the boys help Amos improve these defenses, ladies? Let's get inside and see to those babies. They sound hungry." The cabin filled with people. More visitors than it had seen in all the years Amos had lived there. Women cooed over the twins while men discussed fields of fire and defensive positions. Someone had brought fresh bread. Another had a jug of cider. Amos found himself on the porch with Tom Garrett, accepting a drink from the older man's flask. "Never figured you for the marrying kind, Walker," Garrett said. "Never figured myself for it, neither. She's a fighter, your woman. Not many would stand like that. Rifle in hand, babies crying behind her." "No," Amos agreed. "Not many would." Garrett was quiet a moment. Then, my Ellen was like that, tough as boot leather when she needed to be, soft as silk with our young'uns. Lost her to the fever 5 winters back. He took another pull from the flask. "You hold on to that one. Walker, hold tight and don't let go." As the afternoon wore on, a plan took shape. The men would take turns standing watch. The women would help Maybelle with supplies and the babies. If Marcus came back, he'd find not just one family but a community ready to defend its own. When the last neighbor finally left at dusk, Amos and Maybelle stood in their doorway, watching them go. "They came," Maybelle said wonderingly. "All of them came. Frontier folk are funny that way. Might gossip about you, might judge you, but threaten one of their own and they close ranks. We're one of their own now." He put his arm around her, drawing her close. "Seems so." They went inside, where the babies slept peaceful in their cradle, unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Maybelle busied herself with dinner while Amos cleaned the rifles and checked the windows. "He'll be back," she said quietly. "I know. We could run, like the sheriff said. Take the girls, head for California or Oregon. Start fresh where nobody knows us." Amos considered it, the thought of loading up their few possessions, disappearing into the vast wilderness, finding some new valley where the Carter name meant nothing. It had appeal. But then he looked around the cabin, at the cradle he'd built, the curtains Maybelle had sewn, the small touches that had turned his bachelor shack into a home. He thought of Martha's fierce protectiveness, of Tom Garrett's quiet support, of neighbors he'd barely known standing ready to fight for them. "No," he said finally. "This is our home. These are our people now. We stand our ground." Maybelle moved to him, slipping her arms around his waist. Then we stand together." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her against him. In the cradle, one of the babies sighed in sleep. Outside, an owl called across the darkening valley. Together, he agreed. They'd won today, but Marcus would return with more men, better papers, bigger threats. The fight wasn't over, might never truly be over. But for now, they were safe. They were family. They were home. And sometimes, Amos thought, that's all the victory a man could ask for. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. Tonight, he had everything he'd never known he wanted, right here in his arms. The gold he'd chased for so long seemed like a fool's dream now. This, Maybelle's steady breathing, the baby's soft sighs, the rifle propped ready by the door. This was treasure worth any fight. Let Marcus come. Let him bring his armies and his papers and his fury. He'd find Amos Walker ready, with his wife beside him and their community at their backs. A man couldn't ask for better odds than that. The days after the confrontation passed in a blur of activity. Neighbors came and went, bringing supplies and news. Tom Garrett and his sons helped Amos fortify the cabin, adding shutters that could withstand bullets and digging defensive positions. Martha organized the women into a schedule, ensuring someone was always available to help with the twins. Through it all, Amos watched his wife bloom. The scared, broken woman he'd found on the trail was transforming before his eyes. Maybelle moved with new purpose, her chin held high, her voice strong when she spoke. The community's acceptance had given her something she'd never had before, a place where she belonged. "You're different," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire, the babies sleeping between them in their cradle. "How so?" "Stronger, more yourself." She smiled, reaching over to adjust Emma's blanket. "I spent so long being what others wanted me to be. Samuel's wife, a vessel for sons, a disappointment." Her hand found his. "You're the first person who ever wanted me to just be Maybelle." "It's a good person to be." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind in the pines. Then Maybelle spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "I've been thinking about what Marcus said, about the federal marshals." Amos tensed. They'd avoided discussing the threat, focusing instead on immediate preparations. But he'd known this conversation was coming. "If he brings federal law into this, we can't fight that," Maybelle continued. "The neighbors can stand against hired guns, but not the United States government." "I know. So what do we do?" Amos had been pondering the same question. In his experience, when a man couldn't win by force, he had to win by being smarter. And Marcus Carter, for all his money and connections, had one weakness: his pride. "We need help," he said finally. "Legal help. Someone who knows the law better than Crane." "That costs money we don't have." "Maybe, maybe not." He stood, pacing to the window. "Martha mentioned once that her nephew back east is a lawyer. Works for one of those societies that helps folks who can't afford justice. Worth asking." Maybelle's eyes lit up. "You think he'd come all this way?" "Only one way to find out." The next morning, Amos rode to Martha's place. He found her in her garden, battling weeds with the same determination she'd shown facing down Marcus Carter. "A lawyer," she straightened, pushing gray hair back from her forehead. "Well, young Theodore does have a practice in Philadelphia. Specializes in family law, if I recall." She gave him a shrewd look. "This about Marcus threatening federal involvement?" "Word travels fast." "Always does. Tom Brennan's been drowning his conscience at Murphy's saloon. In his cups, he let slip that Marcus is telegraphing judges and marshals, calling in old favors." She attacked a particularly stubborn weed. "My Theodore's a good boy, idealistic, believes in justice and all that. Might be just what you need. Would you write him, ask him to come?" Martha nodded slowly. "I'll do more than that. I'll telegraph him today. Express urgency. If I know Theodore, he'll be on the next train west." 3 weeks passed before Theodore Holloway arrived. 3 weeks of tense watching, of jumping at every sound, of Amos barely leaving the cabin for fear Marcus would strike while he was gone. But when the young lawyer finally appeared, Amos understood why Martha spoke of him with such pride. Theodore Holloway was everything his aunt was: sharp-eyed, quick-minded, and absolutely fearless. Despite his Eastern clothes and pale complexion, there was steel in his spine. "Mr. Walker." He shook Amos's hand firmly. "Aunt Martha has told me everything. May I meet your wife and see all relevant documents?" For the next 2 days, Theodore immersed himself in their case. He interviewed Maybelle extensively, taking notes in a precise hand. He examined every paper: the marriage certificate, adoption documents, even the receipt for supplies Amos had bought that first day. "Fascinating," he murmured, adjusting his spectacles. "Marcus Carter has influence, but he's made several legal errors. First, abandonment, under territorial law. A husband who leaves his wife and children in dangerous circumstances forfeits parental rights. Second, the adoption. While he claims it's invalid, I see nothing improper about it. Judge Crane may drink, but his paperwork is impeccable." "So we have a chance?" Maybelle asked, holding Grace while Emma slept in Amos's arms. "More than a chance, but we need to act quickly. File countersuits before Marcus can solidify his federal connections." Theodore smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "Mrs. Walker, how would you feel about suing your former husband for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty?" Maybelle's eyes widened. "Is that possible?" "Not only possible, but strategic. We file in Denver, where Marcus has less influence. Simultaneously, we petition for formal recognition of the adoption and an injunction against harassment." He leaned forward. "I should warn you, this will get ugly. The Carters will use every weapon at their disposal." "Let them come," Amos said. Theodore's smile widened. "Aunt Martha said you'd say that." They spent the next week preparing. Theodore drafted documents with meticulous care, while Amos and Maybelle gathered supporting evidence. Martha rallied the neighbors to sign affidavits about finding Maybelle near death, about Amos's care of the family, about Marcus's threats. Then, one morning, as Theodore prepared to leave for Denver to file the papers, riders appeared on the horizon. Not Marcus this time, but something worse: 3 men wearing the stars of federal marshals. "Stay inside," Amos told Maybelle, checking his rifle. But Theodore put a hand on his arm. "No. Let me handle this. Violence now undermines everything we've built." The lawyer walked out to meet the marshals, looking impossibly young but carrying himself with confidence. Amos watched from the window. Maybelle pressed close beside him. "Gentlemen," Theodore called out, "I'm Theodore Holloway, attorney for Mr. and Mrs. Walker. How may I assist you?" The lead marshal, a grizzled man with careful eyes, dismounted slowly. "Name's Coleman. We're here about a complaint filed by one Marcus Carter. Claims his sister-in-law kidnapped his brother's children." "I see." Theodore pulled papers from his coat. "Then you'll be interested in these documents: legal adoption, signed and witnessed, marriage certificate, and—" He produced another paper with a flourish. "A sworn statement from Dr. Emil Hoffman of Denver, attesting that Mrs. Walker bore clear signs of childbirth trauma consistent with abandonment and neglect." Coleman examined the papers, his expression unreadable. The other marshals shifted restlessly. "Additionally," Theodore continued, "I'll be filing charges against Marcus and Samuel Carter for conspiracy to commit murder, as leaving a woman and newborns without supplies or transport in wilderness constitutes attempted homicide under Federal Statute 314. Odd. That's a stretch, Counselor. Perhaps, but it will require investigation, testimony, public scrutiny." Theodore smiled pleasantly. I'm sure the Carter family welcomes such attention to their affairs." Coleman was quiet for a long moment. Then he handed the papers back. "Seems like this is a matter for the courts, not marshals." "My thought exactly." The marshal remounted, but paused before riding off. "Word of advice, counselor. The Carters have deep pockets. They can make life difficult for folks." "They can try," Theodore replied, "but I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth, and a client willing to fight for it." Coleman touched his hat brim and rode away, his men following. Only when they disappeared did Amos realize he'd been holding his breath. "They're gone?" Maybelle asked, disbelieving. "For now?" Theodore turned to them, grinning. "But that was just the opening skirmish. The real battle comes in court." The next months were a whirlwind. True to Coleman's warning, the Carters made life difficult. Suppliers suddenly couldn't extend credit. The assay office found problems with Amos's gold samples. Anonymous complaints appeared about everything from the cabin's construction to the welfare of the twins. But for every attack, Theodore had a counter. He filed injunctions, demanded investigations, buried the Carters in paperwork. And slowly, public opinion began to shift. Stories emerged of other women Samuel had mistreated. Business partners complained of Marcus's sharp practices. The respectable facade cracked, revealing the rot beneath. Through it all, Amos and Maybelle held tight to each other and their daughters. The twins thrived, growing round and happy, their laughter filling the cabin. And somewhere between the legal battles and sleepless nights, between the shared fears and small victories, Amos noticed something changing between him and his wife. It started with little things. The way Maybelle's face lit up when he came home, how she reached for his hand during Theodore's more dire warnings, the soft kiss she placed on his cheek each morning, lingering a moment longer each day. Then came the night when Theodore arrived with news that the divorce had been granted, that Samuel's rights were terminated, that the adoption was upheld by the Territorial Supreme Court. "It's over?" Maybelle asked, clutching the papers. "The legal battle. Yes, Marcus may try other means, but legally, you're free. The twins are yours and Amos's, now and forever." She broke down then, months of tension releasing in tears. Amos held her while she sobbed, his own eyes burning. Theodore quietly excused himself, leaving them alone with their joy and relief. "We did it," Maybelle whispered against his chest. "We really did it." "You did it," Amos corrected. "You stood up to them. You fought." She pulled back to look at him, and something in her eyes made his heart race. "I couldn't have done it without you, my husband, my partner, my—" "Your what?" She reached up, framing his face with her hands. "My love." The words hung between them, precious as gold dust. Amos searched her face, hardly daring to believe. "You said you couldn't love me," he reminded her. "I said I didn't love you then. But Amos Walker, how could I not love you now you gave me and my daughters a name, a home, a future? You stood against the world for us. You showed me what a real man looks like." Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you, not from gratitude or obligation, but because you're the best man I've ever known." He kissed her then, really kissed her, with all the longing of the past months. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I love you too," he said. "Have since that first day. I think when you looked at me with those fierce eyes and told me to take your baby somewhere safe, knew right then you were the strongest person I'd ever meet." She laughed, watery but real. "Strong I was dying." "No, you were living, fighting to live, to give your girls a chance. That's the strongest thing there is." They stood there in their cabin, holding each other while the twins slept peacefully nearby. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the valley in clean white. But inside was warmth and light and love, a family forged in hardship but tempered by hope. "What happens now?" Maybelle asked. "Now?" Amos smiled.
Now we live. We raise our daughters. We work the claim, build a bigger cabin, maybe run some cattle. We be happy.
That's simple.
That's simple.
She kissed him again, soft and sweet.
I like simple.
Later, as they prepared for bed in the quiet cabin, Maybelle paused by the cradle where Emma and Grace slept. The wooden mobile Amos had carved turned slowly above them, catching the lamplight.
They'll never know,
she said softly,
how close we came to losing everything.
Maybe that's good, Amos replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. They'll grow up thinking it's normal to be loved, to be wanted, to have parents who'd fight the world for them. Is that what we are now, parents?
Been that since the day I carried you off that trail. Just took us a while to realize it.
She leaned back against him, and they stood watching their daughters sleep. Two little girls who would grow up Walker, not Carter, who would know their worth had nothing to do with their gender and everything to do with their character, who would be raised by a mother who'd found her strength and a father who'd found his purpose. The gold Amos had chased for so long seemed like a distant dream now, pale and insignificant compared to the treasure in this room. He'd thought he was saving them that day on the trail. Turned out they'd saved him right back.
Thank you,
Maybelle whispered. For what? For seeing us, for choosing us, for loving us? He pressed a kiss to her hair.
Thank you for letting me.
Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the harsh landscape in soft white. But inside the Walker cabin, warm and safe and full of love, a family settled in for the night, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. They'd won more than a legal battle. They'd won the right to be themselves, to love freely, to build a life together. And in the wild territories of the American West, that was the greatest victory of all. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and filling the streams with rushing water. The cabin that had seemed so small when Amos first brought Maybelle home now fairly burst with life. Emma and Grace, nearly 6 months old, had discovered their voices and used them liberally, their babbling filling the air from dawn to dusk.
I swear those girls could talk the ears off a mule,
Martha said one afternoon, bouncing Grace on her knee while Maybelle kneaded bread.
Going to be a handful when they start using actual words.
They already are. Maybelle laughed, flour dusting her cheeks.
Yesterday, Emma grabbed Amos's beard and wouldn't let go. You should have seen him trying to work with a baby attached to his face.
The women shared a comfortable laugh. Martha had become a regular visitor, often bringing Lucy to help with the twins. The girl had grown confident under Maybelle's gentle guidance, learning not just baby care, but cooking, sewing, and the 1,000 small skills that made a home. Outside, Amos worked with Tom Garrett and his sons, expanding the cabin. What had started as emergency fortifications had evolved into plans for additional rooms, the gold claim, while never producing the mother lode Amos had dreamed of, yielded enough to buy lumber and supplies.
Going to need more space soon,
Tom observed, watching Amos carefully fit a beam. Those girls won't stay babies forever. I know. Amos wiped sweat from his brow. Figure 2 more rooms now, maybe another 2 in a year or so.
Planning a big family, are you?
Tom's eyes twinkled with mischief. Amos felt heat rise in his neck. He and Maybelle had grown closer these past months, their marriage becoming real in every sense. The possibility of more children was there, unspoken but acknowledged in quiet moments.
Whatever comes,
he said simply. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Good man. This land needs families. Roots. Too many come through chasing dreams and leaving nothing behind. That evening, after the Garretts had gone and the twins were settled, Amos found Maybelle sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. He settled beside her, taking her hand. Tired.
Good tired,
she said, leaning against him. The kind that comes from a full day. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the evening birds and the distant sound of the creek. Then Maybelle spoke, her voice thoughtful. I got a letter today, from Samuel. Amos tensed. They'd heard nothing from Maybelle's former husband since the divorce was finalized. What did he want? To meet the girls. He says he's changed, found religion, wants to make amends. She pulled the letter from her pocket, already creased from folding and unfolding. Says he was wrong to abandon us. Do you believe him? I don't know. She stared at the letter. Part of me wants to, the part that still remembers the man who courted me with flowers and promises, but I remember the rest too. The cruel words, the cold silences, the day he looked at our daughters like they were worthless. Her voice hardened. He made his choice. Amos squeezed her hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. They're your daughters too. Our daughters, she corrected firmly. You're their father in every way that matters. You're the one who held them through colic, who sings those ridiculous mining songs to make them laugh, who's building them a bigger home. She turned to face him. But maybe that's why I should let him see them. So they know, when they're older, that we gave him the chance, that we chose love over hate. You're a better person than me. Amos admitted. I'd want to punch him in the nose. That startled a laugh from her. Oh, I want that too. But Martha says holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Martha's usually right about things. Usually. Well, she was wrong about my coffee. Said it could strip paint, but I've seen it fail to clean a rusty nail. Maybelle laughed again, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. Your coffee is terrible, and you know it. Good thing I married a woman who makes it proper, then. She kissed him, soft and sweet. Good thing indeed. A week later, Samuel Carter arrived, not with the pomp and threats of his brother, but alone, on a tired horse, looking older than his years. Amos met him at the property line, rifle in hand but not raised. Walker, Samuel's voice was different, quieter, uncertain. I appreciate you allowing this. Wasn't my choice. Maybelle decided. But know this, one wrong word, one threat, and you're gone. I understand. They walked to the cabin in silence. Maybelle waited on the porch, the twins in their cradle beside her. She dressed them in their best gowns, tiny bonnets framing their round faces. When Samuel saw them, he stopped short. His voice caught. They're beautiful. They are. Maybelle agreed evenly. No thanks to you. Samuel flinched but nodded. I deserve that. Deserve worse. He took a tentative step forward. May I hold one? Maybelle looked at Amos, who nodded slightly. Whatever else Samuel was, he was still the man who'd fathered these children. Biology didn't make him their papa, but it was a connection that couldn't be entirely severed. This is Emma, Maybelle said, lifting the baby carefully. She's the eldest by 10 minutes. Samuel took Emma with awkward care, as if afraid she might break. The baby studied him with solemn eyes, then reached for his nose with chubby fingers. A smile ghosted across his face. She has your eyes, he said to Maybelle. And her father's stubborn streak, Maybelle replied, the emphasis subtle but clear. Samuel's gaze flicked to Amos, understanding passing between them. Yes, I can see that. He looked back at Emma. I'm sorry, little one. Sorry I wasn't the man you needed me to be. They spent an awkward hour, Samuel holding each twin in turn, asking careful questions about their habits and health. Mabel answered with cautious courtesy, while Amos stood sentinel, ready to intervene if needed. Finally, Samuel handed Grace back to her mother and stood. Thank you for this. I know I don't deserve it. No, Maybelle agreed. You don't, but they deserve to meet you, even if they won't remember it. Samuel reached into his coat, producing a leather pouch. It's not much, but I've been saving for them, for their education or dowries or whatever they might need. Amos stepped forward. We don't need Carter money. It's not Carter money. Samuel's voice was firm for the first time. It's mine. Earned honest. Working cattle drives. Please, let me do this one thing right. Maybelle took the pouch, hefting it thoughtfully. We'll put it aside for them. When they're older, they can decide what to do with it. Samuel nodded, relief clear on his face. He started to leave, then paused. Walker, you're a better man than me, better father. I'm glad they have you. After he'd gone, Amos and Maybelle sat together, processing the strange visit. That wasn't what I expected. Amos admitted, people can change, Maybelle said thoughtfully. Maybe not enough to undo the past, but enough to do better going forward. Very philosophical, Mrs. Walker. She smiled. Must be all that wisdom you're rubbing off on me. As spring deepened into summer, life settled into new rhythms. The cabin expansion progressed. Neighbors pitched in for barn raisings and fence repairs. The community that had rallied against Marcus Carter's threats now embraced the Walker family fully. Theodore visited regularly, bringing news from Denver and beyond. Marcus had retreated, his reputation damaged by the legal battles and revelations about his business practices. The threat wasn't gone entirely, but it had faded to a distant storm cloud. You've won more than a legal victory, Theodore told them over dinner one evening. You've set precedent. Other women in similar situations are finding courage to stand up for themselves, citing your case. We just wanted to be left in peace, Maybelle said. Sometimes fighting for peace inspires others to do the same. Theodore replied, never underestimate the power of one family standing firm. As autumn arrived, painting the aspens gold, Amos stood in the doorway of the expanded cabin, surveying their kingdom. The new rooms were complete, sturdy and warm. A proper kitchen for Maybelle, a separate bedroom for the twins, even a small parlor for receiving guests. The twins themselves had grown into crawling terrors, exploring every corner with determined curiosity. Emma had her mother's quick intelligence, figuring out cabinet latches with alarming efficiency. Grace showed her father's steady patience, content to work at a problem until solved. Penny, for your thoughts. Maybelle appeared beside him, slipping her arm through his. Just thinking how different it all is. Year ago, I was alone in a 2-room shack, breaking my back for gold dust. Now you're breaking your back for family instead. He chuckled. Something like that. She turned to face him. Expression serious. Do you ever regret it giving up the dream of striking it rich? Amos considered the question. There were times, working the claim in the cold dawn, when he wondered what might have been. If he'd kept searching, kept digging, would he have found that elusive mother lode? But then he'd come home to Maybelle's smile, to the twins' delighted squeals when they saw him, to a house full of warmth and laughter and purpose. The answer came easy. I did strike it rich, he said, just not the way I expected. She rose on her toes to kiss him. Smooth talker. Learned from the best. Daddy, Daddy. The call came from inside. Emma's first real word. Practiced all week. Grace quickly echoed her sister, their voices bright with excitement. Sounds like the gold nuggets are awake. Maybelle laughed. They went inside together, to their daughters, to their life, outside. The mountains stood eternal, hiding their treasures in stone and shadow. But inside the Walker cabin, the real treasure was in plain sight, a family built on love, tested by fire and stronger for the trials they'd faced. That night, after the twins were asleep and the house was quiet, Amos lay beside his wife, her head on his chest, listening to her breathe. In the darkness, she spoke. I never thanked you properly for saving us that day. You've thanked me 1,000 times. No. She propped herself up to look at him. Not for taking us in. For seeing us, really seeing us, not as burdens or obligations or property, but as people worth fighting for. Maybelle. I thought I was saving you. Truth is, you saved me. She smiled. remembering his words from so long ago, from more than dying, from believing I was worthless. He pulled her close, feeling the solid weight of her against him, the reality of this life they'd built together. "We saved each other," he said. "That's what family does." Outside, a coyote called across the valley, wild and free. Inside, the Walker family slept peaceful and safe, dreaming of tomorrows they'd face together. The gold rush had passed them by, but they'd found something more precious than any yellow metal. They'd found home, they'd found love, they'd found each other. And in the untamed West, where men died chasing dreams and women struggled just to survive, that was the richest strike of all. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls, not the cold shadows of loneliness, but the warm play of light that meant life, family, and future. Amos Walker had spent years reading the signs in rock and water, searching for treasure. Turned out the greatest treasures didn't glitter. They laughed and cried and called you daddy. They stood beside you against the world. They turned a house into a home and a lone prospector into a man complete. As sleep finally took him, Amos's last thought was a prayer of gratitude, not for gold or silver or any earthly riches, but for a woman's courage on a dusty trail, for twin girls who'd needed a father, for neighbors who'd become family, and for the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. He'd dreamed of gold in the silent West, but found something infinitely more precious, and he wouldn't trade it for all the nuggets hidden in all the mountains in the world. Thank you all so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening while driving through your own mountains, cozied up at home, or perhaps on a long journey? Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what touched your heart in Amos and Maybelle's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of love and courage in the Old West.